how to constantly come up with new content ideas. Constantly and content. It's basically constantly content. So there are different approaches to this. The first approach is to just turn the things you already are interested in and you're already experiencing into something that is content. Therefore, content is nothing else than information that is kind of shared and packed into a format that is actually consumable. This format could be a video, it could be a podcast, it could be a short video, it could be a blog article, it could be a essay in a newspaper. So therefore, but why do many people write biographies? Because it's a book about something they already experienced. Therefore, the only thing they have to do is put it into a format. Why? It's not why. I just used the wrong beginning of the sentence. But it's just very easy because it's something that already is kind of present in their life itself, and they just put it into a format that is then a book. And this makes it so easy. So you could use the same principle or the same approach to just turn all of the parts of your life that could be interesting to someone else into a book, into a video, into something else. This is one approach. I would call it the interest-based approach or the life already approach or whatever you want to call it. Just take the things that you already think about, that you already do in your life, and you just talk about them, you just write about them, you just blog about them. The next approach is to also constantly consume things. The problem is kind of that whenever you do things, because you just do the things, you don't necessarily think about new things. The thing is, I think, about constantly making up new things is this. There are different maps you have of the world, and one map, of course, is the visual map. But there are also other maps, and a map is obviously just a representation, just using a geographical representation of something that exists in our brain, a representation of the outer world that exists in our brain. This could be a representation of how the political system in Europe or in the US or in India or in China works. This could also be something different. The thing is, what happens is that all these maps exist. For example, this could also be a map for speaking English, for example. I just use a map because it's actually something, because the neurons actually are kind of very similar or act very similar. So the actual brain cells in your brain actually connect in a very similar way, and you could actually kind of draw a map of the brain and then just draw all the lines where connections have happened. This is the reason the map analogy or metaphor kind of works, I guess. So therefore, you could have a map for speaking English. And now the thing is how to come up with new things by learning a new language. You then combine the two maps, basically the already existing English map and the maybe then existing French map. And what you then can do is, every time you encounter similarities, for example, you can, when it comes to how easy it is to learn, obviously it's the more maps already exist and the more maps you can already use to build new maps, to build new connections, the easier it is. But something else that happens is whenever we have two maps that are very similar, for example, I had this very often when let's just leave myself out of the equation here because I don't want to make everything I talk about personal. So therefore, if you have a map, for example, when it comes to managing your time, then managing your time, for example, has huge similarities to managing someone else's time or managing any other project, because most projects exist through time with action of certain people and the time itself, multiplied basically by the time itself. And therefore you have these similarities, but you also have different things, different concepts that just connect, that just are inherently connected, but as soon as you know both things, then they can connect. And this is then often when a new idea kind of is born, because you just compare these two different approaches approaches to something, and then you realize that's basically the same thing. For example, using minutes as a unit to measure time, or minutes and hours and something else, and using kilograms in order to measure how heavy something is, or ounces or whatever, and grams, and is basically the same concept. Is taking something that's basically just not adherent to a strict schedule, like weight. Because, for example, if you have a tree, you can't just count trees. Obviously the trees also have different sizes, and if you cut them down, volume may be the better, or density may be a better measurement, or a better unit to actually measure how many trees you have. But when it comes to trees, or when it comes to cars, for example, on a road, just using one full car is something that's useful. If you then again want to measure how much traffic, when it comes to, or how much load there is on the roads, because you actually have to maintain a certain road, and then you actually want to measure how much load there is on there, then viewing each vehicle as its own unit obviously is not something that's useful again, because then the load, the general load, or the general weight per unit of time, for example, is something that is more usable. But when you compare, for example, kilograms, and also so the units, to simplify, something that is basically, that doesn't stick to a schedule, like the years we spent on Earth, for example, adhere already to the schedule of years and minutes and seconds and months. So you can basically display any time with these already made up heuristics. So therefore, if you measure something in years, then it's even numbers. It's not even numbers, but it's natural numbers. So basically numbers over zero, sometimes with zero, that are like 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's years. Therefore you have these full units. So the concept I'm coming back to of using something like kilograms and grams in order to measure something that has no natural unit, and the concept of time, because time is also something that doesn't stick to something, at least in the beginning, before you come up with something like minutes, hours and seconds and define it somehow. Obviously, I mean, these are all based on the occurrence of, for example, natural things, like how long it takes for a moon, and that's basically the month. So how long it takes for a moon to basically do all the different rotations and be viewed from all the different angles, and therefore we have the moon phases, and therefore we have the months, kind of. But before all of this, it's a simplification. It's a simplification of something that doesn't stick to natural units, that doesn't have like even natural steps. Therefore it's the same kind of analogy, it's the same kind of concept, and therefore a concept idea would be maybe comparing the simplifications we use in terms of time and in terms of weight. So comparing these two different things, and then it's a new idea. It's something you can talk about, because you can't talk about the similarities. You can also talk about the similarities between water and how water flows, and electric current and how electric current flows, and therefore you have a new idea. You could also compare, for example, how the body actually digests things and basically turns food, matter, into energy with what Einstein basically formulated with his formula, where energy is basically equal to mass multiplied by c squared, so by the light speed squared. And these are things you just kind of can compare. You can compare two random things. They don't have to be connected before, but you actually can connect them. And what happens often, if you listen, whenever you encounter something new, then you obviously compare the new thing to the things that are already existent in your brain, to the maps that are already existent. And therefore, if you just keep a constant flow of new things, of new ideas into your life, then you constantly think about these new ideas. For example, by listening to podcasts, for example, like 10 to 20 minutes a day, or by reading constantly new articles about tech, you will have like all these ideas that are kind of naturally occurring just because you think about these things while you actually consume the new ideas. Therefore, your brain is like, oh yeah, let's just connect these two things and then we have a new idea. And that's basically the two approaches to coming up with new ideas. Either you take the thing that already exists and try to just record it basically, and record it in a format that's useful, or you just try to connect the things you already have with new ideas. And again, the other extreme, so that would be the middle, and the other extreme obviously is to just completely make content about new things. There is only one problem with this approach, is the time it takes to just research all the stuff. For example, if I want to make a video that actually explains how Einstein's special relativity theory connects to his other findings, then I would have to research all of this because I don't want to be wrong. I mean, that's also a principle kind of. If you just don't talk about things where you have a very high chance of being wrong, then it's also something that is kind of useful, because it again kind of only makes sense to talk about the things you already know or you are knowledgeable about, because the more you go into fields where you just don't have a clue at all, I mean, you just could say things that are wrong, and the risk is just much higher. And therefore, if you actually want to churn out content, or if you want to turn out actually the ideas you have, then it just doesn't really make sense to go into topics where you have to first study for 10 years straight. And therefore, just talk about the things you already can talk about, connect them with new things, because you have, for example, a habit of reading or a habit of listening to podcasts, and then you can connect the old ideas to new ideas, or talk about totally new ideas, and actually, yeah, but also obviously bear the risk to go into these completely new ideas.